What is good, beautiful people? I want to give you a follow-up on my last video. I think I can do a bit deeper dive into the explanation, evolution, and example specifically of our pillar prep. That example is our sequence of life. I cued the early exercises. Honestly, someone walked in and then I ended up not cueing the later ones. I want to give you the real ability to use that, then I want your feedback on it. But let's start at the beginning with explanation of pillar prep. As I said before, the first time we were exposed to pillar prep was at a phenomenal course I highly recommend with Exos. It's their 2-day strength course. And what they were talking about is, for their pillar prep, they consider the integration of mobility and stability from the shoulders, trunk, and hips, which is great. A great explanation. It just made it hard for us to still quantify it and use it in practice. They gave us great examples of pillar prep exercises, etc. But for me to get my clients, my patients, my students, or other therapists to understand that, I felt like it needed a little bit more context and to make it a little more objective. So the next thing we did was look for a few more explanations of it. University of Colorado had a nice little explanation of it, and they said getting switched on all the muscles that insert into the shoulders and the hips and everything in between. Very similar definition, very good, but also if I take a new physical therapist or I take a new trainer and I say, hey, that's the definition, go take it and run, they're gonna get there eventually. It's just gonna take them a really long time to build it because they're gonna constantly be asking, like, did I get that switch on? Did I actually get that switched on? Did I get this? I know I got this switched on, but did I get switched on good enough? It kind of lends itself to thinking about the body 360 degrees around the shoulders, around the trunk, and around the hips. But again, for a new therapist, a new trainer, or also just a general consumer who's trying to put all this information into a usable format, it doesn't necessarily have the nice check boxes that we like to talk about. So for us, around the same time, we were teaching anatomy, and we were going through the ranges of motion of the body, and in the ranges of motion from that we built the muscle groups. So for every range of motion that we teach, we would then follow up and teach the muscle groups that did that, the specific muscles that would end up doing that motion. And so that's when we had that aha moment. We were teaching anatomy, so we were starting with the ranges of motion, and we were going through and we were doing the ranges of motion of the hip, and we were doing the ranges of motion of the trunk, and we were doing the range of motions of the shoulder, and we kind of realized that those range of motion buckets or boxes were what needed to be checked as far as the muscle groups that needed to be switched on during your appropriate pillar prep. So we say that pillar prep is as easy as 2, 4, and 6, and I'll explain that now. So we'll start with the 6. There's 6 ranges of motion of the hip, which means that there's 6 muscle groups that do those ranges of motion. Now, muscles will do many ranges of motion, but in general, when we talk about, we'll say the hip flexors, which is here, we're talking about the iliopsoas, the TFL, the anterior groin, and the rectus femoris. We're not going to do a deep dive on all the anatomy, but I just want you to understand that when we talk about the ranges of motion, there are muscles that do that, and those are the muscles that we want to switch on. And we know that if we get all of the ranges of motion for the various levels of the body or various areas of the body turned on, we're going to get all those muscle groups switched on, and we're going to turn on all of those muscles. So 6 is where we start, which is the ranges of motion of the hip, which is hip flexion, hip extension, hip abduction, hip adduction, bringing it across your body, then external rotation and internal rotation. For the trunk, we have 4 ranges of motion. That's trunk flexion, or forward bending, extension, or backward bending, side bending, and rotation. Side bending and rotation to both sides. And then for the shoulder, we simplified it a little bit. So we took the shoulder and the scapula, which is your shoulder blade, and we said it needs to be able to stabilize forward or anterior and posterior or backwards. Those are the 2 ways that we need to think about it. And you can think about that as like a plank or doing something where you're bringing back, like a Blackburn exercise. So those were the 6, 4, and 2, or the 12 the dozen muscle groups that we knew that we had to get switched on for appropriate pillar prep. So now that you understand the explanation of it, again, getting the muscles that insert into the shoulder and the hip and everything in between switched on, and also having the appropriate mobility. But with that mobility generally comes from actually moving through. And then the other thing is the evolution, where we kind of tried to pick from different realms, from other people that we have learned from, and then also from our experience as anatomy teachers. And then here's an example of it, which is the sequence of life. I'm constantly playing around with this, and always want to try and make really efficient ways, because I don't want you to take 20 minutes to pillar prep. It can happen, and there's nothing wrong with spending a lot of time on it. It's just generally you want to get to your workout as quickly as possible. So here's a sequence of life. I'm going to demonstrate it. I'm going to coach you through it. I'm going to give you additional cues. There's going to be a lot of cueing with it. Don't think that if you are a new coach, or if you're a coach even with a lot of experience, you need to use all of these cues. I just want to give you all the things that you might hear for each of the exercises, and then you can pick and choose the ones that you think that your patient or client needs at that moment in time. And if you're just working out and watching this and wanting to learn a little bit more, try and pick one cue that you feel like you want to focus on, get that down, then build on to the next one. You don't want too much going on upstairs when you're trying to do these exercises. I'd rather you be mindful of the movement that's occurring. So the way that we start out the sequence of life, we get our hip flexors and our trunk flexors moving, or we get them activated. So the first thing we're going to do is this exercise. So I'm like this. I plug my fingertips into the sky, boom, and then I straighten my one leg, try and bring my toes back to my shin, exhale my ribs down, tuck my belly up towards my chin, gently press my back into the ground. You're going to hear that a lot. I'll almost stop saying it, but I'll just say set this area, and you'll know that it's a full exhale down, tuck your belt up towards your chin, gently press your back down into the mat. So if I say set this, that's what I'm talking about. So I'm here, and then I'm just going to do a straight leg raise 5 times on each side. Switch. And for that, we got our trunk flexors and our hip flexors turned on. So out of the 12, 2 down, 10 more to go. So the next thing we're going to do is a floor angel. So I'm going to bring my hands back here. Same way I'm going to set here. You're going to hear me. Exhale. My ribs all the way down to my pelvis. Knit them on. As soon as you feel that they're as low as they can be, as close as they are to the pelvis, to really get that biomechanical breathing to match the purpose or the task that you're asking it to do. Next thing, gently tuck your belt up towards your chin. Gently press your back down into the mat. Now I've gotten my ribs stacked on top of my pelvis. I'm going to bring my arms back, bury my arms into the ground, meaning I'm burying my hand, I'm burying my elbow and my forearm, and I'm burying the backs of my shoulders down to the ground. And then I'm going to exhale, my hands up. You're going to really feel that in your middle back. Five of those. If necessary, put something under, because there needs to be good contact. If you can only get to here, you need to bolster yourself, but you really want to be able to do that exercise. So for that, we got our scap and shoulder posterior and our trunk extensors going. So now 4 down, only 8 more to go. Next thing I'm going to do is gently roll to my side. And I want to get the hip internal rotators going here. So for that, we're going to use a bottoms up clam. So set yourself in a regular clam position, but put one hand here for a little bit of stability. Then rotate that top leg up, hold it, and then all you're going to do is bring that bottom leg halfway up. Kind of an overlooked muscle group. I have a strong opinion that if you want one muscle group to work, you also have to have the antagonist or the opposite muscle group working. I think a lot of people focus on the external rotators. Absolutely necessary. There's a lot of weakness in those. But if you don't just give a little bit of love to the internal rotators, you tend not to get the best the best power output or the best strength output out of that opposite muscle group. So think about it. Sure, I'm working my internal rotators, and a lot of people think like, oh, going into rotation is dangerous. It's not. What's really dangerous is not having any horsepower in your hip internal rotators. And you're also getting a little adductor love there as well. So again, I set here, perfect. Bring this one up and then gently rotate. 2, 3, 4, 5. And pretend that I did that on the other side. Next thing we're going to do is go into a diagonal side bridge. This is part of the McGill Big 3. It's a really great exercise, a lot of bang for your buck. And that's going to cover your hip extensors, abductors, and external rotators. So to recap, we got our hip flexors, our trunk flexors, our scap and shoulder posterior stabilizers, our trunk extensors. Then we got our hip internal rotators and a little bit of adduction. And now we're going to get our hip extensors, abductors, and external rotators. And make sure we get that external rotation at the top by really burying that leg down into the ground. You'll see that in a second. So I'm going to put my elbow right under my shoulder. I'm going to put this hand right here. I'm set up in a very similar position to how I was before. My feet are about on line with my butt, meaning if I were up against the wall, everything would be touching, and my knees are bent to about 90 degrees. This leg can hover a little bit or it can hold, doesn't make a huge difference. You're going to put your hand here. Set yourself. Good. Push the world away here and then bury that left thigh down into the ground to get that external rotation. Give a good squeeze at the top. Good. From that, we're going to go into the side plank. So we're going to set you up here. We're going to go like this. And we're going to do the side plank as the beginning to the rotating plank. So we're right here, and we think that you should be able to hold 15 seconds on the down leg and 15 seconds on the up leg. So meaning 15 seconds just using your abductors on the down side, and 15 seconds just using your adductors on the top side. And I'll show you what that looks like. So if I lift up this leg, 2, 3, and I hold all the way to 15 seconds, I'm doing a good job of getting the hip muscles on the bottom leg that are the abductors firing. So I do that for 15 seconds, then I switch here, and now I'm using the adductors on the top leg, or the groin muscles on the top leg. So now I'm covering that, all while getting the side benders and the shoulder stabilizers, anterior and posterior, going at the same time. Perfect. Cool. I would do that on the other side as well, or I would rotate through to a rotating plank. So pretend that I just did this. 15, beautiful. 15, great. Then I'm going to come down like this, come here, set myself up. Perfect. And my feet are just a little bit wider than my hands. My hands are directly under my shoulders. And I'm here, and I'm going to hold here. And this is where I start to get that trunk rotation component. So I'm really getting this internal oblique and this external oblique. So in this position, I'm getting my right internal oblique, my right hip flexors, my left external oblique, and then all the anterior scap stabilizers on that left side. Also getting my trunk flexors going. 15 seconds on each side here. And then I would either go to the other side and do the side plank, or I would do side plank, and finish with that. Now, if you have someone whose glutes aren't doing such a great job of firing on, you might want to give them a little bit more attention. To do that, I would say after you do the floor angel, do a single leg bridge. So, the way that we teach a single leg bridge is we like to get this crossfender into this sling between the shoulder and the hip going. So we'll build some tension through here, heel up, bury this hand into the ground, either palm down or palm up. And then drive the hips up. We covered with the diagonal side bridge, the hip extensors. But if you have someone who's been sitting at a desk, which is almost everyone, insert this in as a little bit of a double down on those hip extensors. Again, after the floor angel, but before you do the bottoms up clam. And the other thing is, if you want to give a little bit more attention to the trunk extensors, like let's say someone's going to be doing deadlifts or squats, snatches, cleans, anything that you might be a little concerned that their back needs a little bit more attention, those trunk extensors need to be switched on, have them end with a bird dog. Regular bird dogs are great. You're here, pushing the world away, hands are directly under your shoulders, knees are directly under your hips, extend, make a fist so you get some good irradiation. Then you're going to try and pull yourself apart with this fist going that way and that foot going back. Boom. That's a real nice bird dog. If you want to make it a little more dynamic, do some taps. 10 on the bottom and 10 on the top. That's your sequence of life. So just to recap, and we'll put it in with the additions for if you have someone who's been sitting all day and you want to do some squats or deadlifts or cleans or snatches or whatever you want to do with them. You start off with the hip flexor dead bug. That gets your trunk flexors and your hip flexors. Then you have them do the floor angel. That gets their posterior scap stabilizers and their trunk extensors going. Let's say they've been sitting. Add in the single leg bridge that we went into depth at the end with. That's going to get their hip extensors going and a little bit of rotation. Then you're going to turn them on their side. They're going to do that nice bottoms up clam, which is going to get their hip internal rotators and a little bit of their adductors. Then you're going to have them do the diagonal side bridge. Again, for that, if you notice, it looks like I'm taking off with a plane. Like I'm doing equal parts up and equal parts forward at the same time. It's not up and then forward. It's not forward and then up. And also slow that one down. I'm going to preemptively tell you, everyone's going to do it too fast. You need to take 5 seconds up, 5 seconds hold, 5 seconds back down. And for all these, we're doing 5 to 10. And if you have one leg that just feels a little bit off or one arm that just feels a little bit off, do 2 sets on that. So do 2 sets of 10 or do 2 sets of 5 on that and only 1 on the other side. I don't mind asymmetrical training if you're addressing asymmetrical impairments. So to bring it back, we did our diagonal side bridge, which got our abductors, hip extensors, and external rotators going, which was great. Then we put you up into that rotating plank. So in that, we got our side benders going when we were on our side. We got our abductors on the bottom leg, our adductors on the top leg. Then we do the other side, or we could go straight down into a high push-up and do that one-armed high push-up. When we do that, we get our trunk rotators going through there. We get our anterior or forward scap stabilizers going there. We're also getting that hip flexor on the opposite side to the arm that's down. We got that, and then if you want to add in a little bit more, you can add on a nice bird dog or a dynamic bird dog. That's going to really get those trunk extensors going one more time. And that is your sequence of life and a full and robust explanation, evolution, and one beautiful example of pillar prep. Hope you enjoyed it. Please comment below, subscribe to us. We're going to be trying to make breakout videos of these, so I'll give you a whole bunch of trunk flexion exercises, which again, more think of like anti-extensors, trunk side bend, hip flexor, ways to get your hip extensors going on. We're going to be trying to give you a bunch so that you can pick and play with all these and build your own pillar preps, because whatever feels right probably is right. This was your first installment of FIRE, Functional Integrated Rehabilitation Exercise. There's a lot more to come. We're starting a movement towards movement.